Welcome to Books and Coffee. My name is Joyce Kennedy. I'm the Director of Community Relations here at Concordia College, and we're so happy to see you tonight to kick off our season. We have a special guest here, and I will introduce him, but before I do that, I just want to do a couple of housekeeping things. October 25th will be another business breakfast, which is over across the way in the Krenz building, and that will feature Paul Wilson, who's the Senior Vice President of Olympic Sales at NBC, so he will be here talking about, he just came from Rio, so he's had a number of years' experience in Olympic sales, so I think you'll find his conversation very entertaining and very informative, and I understand he has some behind-the-scenes information about some of the recent scandals at the Rio Olympics. So, and then on November 17th, we have Brian Featherstone, who's a local resident, who will be here again for Books and Coffee back here at Sommer Center. So we have a great lineup for the fall, and we hope that you will join us back here or across the way at the Petrusky Auditorium, and take advantage of these programs that are, free and open to the public. So again, welcome. We are fortunate tonight to have Gregory Zuckerman, award-winning journalist and best-selling author, kick off this season of Books and Coffee. Greg first appeared at Books and Coffee in November of 2014 to talk about his second book, The Frackers, the outrageous inside story of the new billionaire wildcatters. The Frackers was named among the best books of the year by the Financial Times, Forbes magazine, and the New York Financial Writers Association. Greg's first book, The Greatest Trade Ever, the behind-the-scenes story of how John Paulson defied Wall Street and made financial history, was a New York Times and Wall Street Journal bestseller. This book was published in 2010 and has been translated in 10 languages. Tonight, Greg will discuss his most recent book, Rising Above, how 11 athletes overcame challenges in their youth to become stars. Written along with his two sons, Elijah and Gabriel, Rising Above is an insider look at how perseverance and dogged determination can lead to success, this time not in the financial markets, but on the playing field. Greg is a special writer at the Wall Street Journal and previously was lead writer for the popular Heard on the Street column. He is a 3-time winner of the Gerald Loeb Award, the highest honor in business journalism. Greg appears regularly on CNBC, Fox Business, Bloomberg Television and Radio, as well as NPR and BBC Radio. Please join me now in welcoming Greg Zuckerman.
Thanks very much. Great to be here, everybody. I was here a few years ago. I had a lot of fun, interesting questions, so I'm looking forward to the same. I'll talk for a little bit about Rising Above, this book we're talking about today, and take some Q&A afterwards, and we can talk about anything. Want to talk about the book or Wall Street Journal, reporting, writing, we can do any of that kind of stuff. So I'll first explain why I wrote this book, which is a little bit of an unusual book because I'm an adult writer, write for the Wall Street Journal. I usually do sort of hardcore finance, but a lot, and I've been there 20 years, so I've been there a little while. But a lot of what I do is sort of sports themes, in that I love home runs and strikeouts. So I write a lot about individuals and firms that do really, really well, a big home run, make a lot of money. I wrote this book called The Greatest Trade Ever because the guy made $20 billion over 2 years for himself and for his firm and for his clients. And I write about embarrassing kind of big, huge mistakes that firms make, individuals make, companies make. So I am sort of oriented in that way, and that's largely because I'm a big sports guy. So I love sports and I love the themes. There's a lot of drama involved, personalities. So I've always been sort of prone to looking for those kind of themes. And a couple years ago, my sons and I started talking about writing a book together, and we jumped on this theme for a bunch of different reasons. And I'll explain them for a little bit. I'll talk about some of the players that we met and the lessons that they gave us, and they were all pretty impressive, I thought. Interesting people, shared a lot of time with us. We were really lucky in that regard. We all had, my sons and I who couldn't be here today, they're both sort of, one's got college applications coming up and he's got to get them done, and the other one just couldn't make, a little too young, 14, he couldn't come out here tonight. But we all had different reasons for working on this book. My youngest son, 14, Eli, pretty much just wanted autographs. That was his sort of excuse. He wanted to meet players, and I'll tell you in a second, sort of a hidden reason as well. And my next son, 17, Gabriel, is more of a reader and a writer, and he runs a blog called Paging Teens, where he reviews books written for young people, and he always wanted to write a book, and I thought it'd be great to do a project with my sons. But we also, and I personally wanted a book to entertain, but also motivate and inspire young people. The book is written for, 8 to sort of teenage, 20, 18, 19. It's kind of a big gap. And it's written on a pretty high level, I think so anyway. We didn't dumb it down or anything in that regard, but there are a lot of lessons for young people, and that's sort of why I got excited about it. I also did, quite honestly, because my youngest son, Eli, is a big sports star in our town. For a 14-year-old, he plays on club, he's baseball, he's gotten into soccer lately, and he was born with 2 fingers on his left hand. And I was hoping that by talking to different players who had different challenges, and I'll get into some of them, he'd become a little more comfortable with his own difference. And I think a little bit more comfortable talking about it. I think over time that takes time. 14's an interesting age, but that was sort of a hidden motivation, and come out and say that to him, but I think he understood. That was part of the reason as well. So there were a lot of kind of different reasons, but another key one is that as a parent, you want to teach your children grit and resiliency and perseverance more than anything else. So I think parents in this room will acknowledge that some advantages in life and some things that maybe aren't your best things that don't come naturally to you. But one thing that we're all going to face in life are setbacks. And I don't care who you are. And you got to be able to deal with those kind of things. And that was sort of our goal, my goal, and my boys as well, to learn how these players dealt with setbacks and also dealt with differences. So it's our contention that everyone's got some difference, be it physical or emotional, socioeconomic, something, and you may not even notice, you may not know on the surface what it is, but we're all dealing with something. And I know that personally, when you dig a little bit, I'm a reporter, you start talking to even sort of billionaire guys on Wall Street, you'd be surprised the insecurity they're dealing with. They're all on their computers checking what their rivals, their competitors are doing, and they can be worth a ton of money and have had many years of success, and you have one down year and you're really insecure and you're nervous and you've got something. Everyone's got something. So that was sort of our goal, to learn from these stars how they dealt with these kind of issues. And what we tried to do is talk to players in different sports and different types of challenges. So I'm going to go through some of them, but we tried to do a little bit of one of everything kind of thing: physical challenges, racism, socioeconomic. I'll go on and I'll explain when I get to each of the players. And some of the players had multiple sets of things they dealt with in life. So again, the goal was to learn from them, and I think we did. And one thing that really was quite amazing is how the players really spent time with us. And I think partly it was because I brought my boys with me. So it's one thing, me, Greg Zuckerman, whatever, reporter at the Wall Street Journal, they talk to guys like me all day long, right? So, but when I brought my son, Serge Ibaka, and I'm going to assume there's some people in the room know some of these players and some don't. So I apologize. I'll give a little background. It'll be insulting to people who are big sports fans, and I won't. And for the other people, you'll learn about him. So Serge Ibaka is a center. He was just recently traded from Oklahoma City to Orlando. He's a star, 7'1", maybe 7'2", in the NBA. And he grew up in the Congo, and his mother died at a young age of cancer, and his father was a political prisoner, and they took him away, and it's a war-torn country, and it wasn't clear where they took him, and he didn't see him for years. He was in prison, and he grew up, and it was quite difficult. So his grandmother, basically, he grew up in her home, and he had cousins and such, so extended family, but often he was alone, and he didn't have that much money. And there were times, and you'll read it in the book if you buy the book, but we found it fascinating that he got to the point where he only had money for one pair of nice shoes, and he usually, I think it was for church he used it. So when it came to basketball, he had some beat up basketball shoes, and what he would do is line them, and he and all his friends did, line them with cardboard, so that when a hole was developed in the bottom of the soles, the cardboard protected them. So, it makes you a little more appreciative, I think, of what we all have. So when I met with him, so we met after, it was between, I think it was, they came to town to play the Knicks, so my sons and I had an opportunity to go meet him in the hotel. And it was interesting, he started warming up, it took a little while, but he warmed up, and by the end he put his arms around my two sons, and he tried to give some life lessons. And one of his life lessons, and we couldn't put it all in the book because it wasn't so appropriate, but basically he said, now I can, he didn't mean it in an egotistical way, he said, now I can get any girl. I got a beautiful girlfriend, but when I was growing up, nobody wanted to be with me because, first of all, he was focused on playing ball. And his friends were like, come on, let's go out Saturday night. And he said, nah, I'm not going out. And they started teasing him, oh, you don't have any money to go out, you have no money for clothes. And he ignored all that. And he told my sons, you've got distractions in life, video games and other kind of things. The only way to be a big success is to focus. And that's what he did. He had this single-minded focus. And I think he really enjoyed putting his arms around my sons again and giving them some life lessons. Some of it was about chasing girls. I didn't necessarily need him to be talking about that, but it was cool that he took the time and he really cared. And again, if I had just gone to talk to him, would he have shared all this stuff? I don't know. But the fact that my sons were there, I think he really wanted to share, not so much with my boys, but share for the next generation. So we got that from different players. Jim Abbott, and I'll get into some of these players. They really shared a lot of time. Not every player talked to us, but most of the players did and spent really good amount of time with us. So those were some of the reasons we wrote the book, to address all these kind of things and to help other people with their own differences and deal with setbacks. Again, some people are dealing with more than others, but we all have something that we deal with. I mean, I know personally at the Wall Street Journal, there were times I was close to being fired, and through no fault of my own. Well, I would say that anyway, right? But there were times, low points in my career, and now I've done, well and all that, but I'll never forget those times, and I'll never feel like they're so far away. Like, I can remember times in the Journal when the top guy at the paper got into the elevator with me and he wouldn't even look at me in the eye because they were down on me. They thought I wasn't doing a good job covering whatever I was covering at the time. Now I'm a hero and all that, but I'll never forget those moments, and you never feel too confident after you've gone through something like that. So we've all dealt with it. I'm not going to compare what I went through with living in a war-torn country in Congo like Serge Ibaka, but we all have some variation of that, and again, that's sort of why we wrote the book. So I want to talk a little bit about some of the different players and some of the different challenges they each had. Excuse me, I'm just going to take off my jacket here. So first I'll start off with some of the physical challenges that some players dealt with, and I'll explain how they did. The first is Tim Howard. I assume many people know. Raise your hand if you don't know who Tim Howard is in this room. Okay, so Tim Howard grew up in New Jersey, New Brunswick, single mother. He, at an early age, he noticed when he was talking to people that he had to touch them. It wasn't clear why. He just had this need to touch them as he was talking to them. And when he went to school each day, he had this routine where he had to do certain things on the way out the door, touch things and feel things, and he could not. And his brother gave him a push on the way, gave him a little punch or something and disrupted his routine. He had to go back and do it again. And his mother, got a little nervous and wasn't sure what it was, but they tried to ignore it. Then he developed some tics, and he kept clearing his throat and over again. Other kinds of things he dealt with. I mean, he'd go to school and his friends would be like, why are you so dark? And he's like, you never notice, when you're a kid, you don't even notice your difference really until someone points it out to you. And his father was African American and his mother was white, and I don't know, just the way he was, and he came up with some excuse. He's like, oh yeah, I was in Florida recently, I got a tan, but he was just a little darker than some of the kids. But anyway, so and it got worse. His his need to touch things. He would go to school every day, and by the time he got to school, his backpack was filled with like rocks and grass and gravel and acorns. He just had to pick them up along the way and put them in his back. And so he was diagnosed with both OCD and Tourette syndrome. And it was good that they diagnosed it because they finally understood what it was, but he had to deal with it. And kids can be cruel. In the book, you see different stars had different reactions. Some kids were worse than others. So you get a little teasing and you deal with that. He had a little bit of that, not too bad. But one of the things that jumped out at me and my sons as we wrote the book, and you see it time and time again, you saw it with Tim Howard, is there's a flip side. He calls it a beautiful flip side to his condition, his Tourette syndrome and OCD, in that, and this is what when they first diagnosed him, the doctor said, okay, yeah, you've got this issue, but there's a beautiful flip side. The flip side is you can focus better than any other kid. So, and they found that. So other kids would play ball for, an hour, maybe hour and a half, and want to go home, that kind of thing. Tim Howard could focus for hours, and he was playing, and so he got into soccer at an early age. He wasn't always the best on the field, but he was always the fastest, and he was big, and he focused on it, and he became really, really good. And again, time and time again, and I'll get into it with some of the other players, there was this beautiful kind of flip side. And going into the book, I just sort of assumed that these players dealt with their differences and adjusted to their setbacks and things like that. But it wasn't just that they dealt with it, they actually turned disadvantages into advantages. So again, Tim Howard, you would think, poor guy's got to deal with Tourette syndrome and OCD, but he actually used that difference as an advantage. So he practiced longer than other people, and then when he was on the field, he could focus on the ball much better than anybody else. Now, he still had to do things like, before every game, touch the ball, touch the goal. He needed to. He was compelled. It was a compulsion. But he developed these other skills that no other kids can match. And he went on to, he was discovered, and he became, he was goalie here professionally, went to England, played for the top team there, eventually went to Everton, also in the top division. Now he's back here, but he made history as our goalie in the World Cup and his remarkable number of saves. And he really goes down in history as the greatest soccer player our country's ever produced. And again, it was turning a difference and a disadvantage into an advantage, which really kind of jumped out at me. Similarly, we went and we talked to Jim Abbott. Okay, raise your hand. Now you'll get more hands. Raise your hand if you don't know who Jim Abbott is. Okay, right. Younger guys don't so much. So he was a pitcher for the Angels and for the New York Yankees, and he was born with one arm. And you say to yourself, well, how did he do it? And it's a pretty remarkable story. And there's a similarity there, and again, in terms of turning the disadvantage into an advantage. So he was born. It was a birth issue. He was just born without one arm. He was born just with a left arm. It ends around here, and actually, I should say around here. But he couldn't grip things. He couldn't do anything. And originally they gave him a prosthetic, but it was hot and bulky, and he made his parents get rid of it. And he grew up, and he always had this really strong arm. So he was always the quarterback, playing ball with his friends. He hit, when he was hitting, he would actually hit really well with his left hand. With one hand, really kind of hit really well. But what opponents would do, and you say you're going to feel bad about this, is opposing coaches would make their players bunt on him. So he was always the pitcher. And why were they bunting on him? Because they were trying to take advantage of him. Because you see a guy who's got one arm, how the heck is he going to field a bunt? He's going to run up and somehow figure it out. So they took advantage of him, and you feel bad, instinctively as a parent. And I try to protect my kids and all that. But in some ways, it was good because it forced him. So he let up a lot of runs early on. And what he did was he went to his backyard, to the side of his house, and he started throwing the ball against the wall and figuring out how to field the ball. And he developed this remarkable, you can go on videos and see it, remarkable ability to, I'm not going to be able to even show it so well, but basically he would shove the glove under his arm, pick up the ball with his left hand, transfer really quickly, throw the ball, and I'm a righty, so I'm not doing it well. But he has a remarkable ability to field the ball. And because they did, and one time, believe it or not, 12 12 batters in a row bunted on him. The coach kept making the opponents bunt on him to take advantage of him. And again, you feel bad, but it taught him how to feel that position. And he eventually became a really good fielder, not just as good as other people, but better than other people, born with two arms. So I thought it was kind of fascinating, that whole issue, that whole theme of turning a disadvantage into an advantage. So he eventually went to Michigan. He was drafted really high up and went to California, Angels, Anaheim, what they call them now, and he was a pitcher. And his whole goal really was to be seen as a pitcher, not a pitcher with a difference, not like anybody else. And there were all these headlines that, you look back, people weren't as sensitive to these things back then, but it was sort of Angels draft one-armed pitcher kind of thing. And his whole thing was that was the last thing he wanted. He was drafted high not because he had one arm, because he was a great pitcher. He threw, I think at the time, mid-90s and had a cutter. And yeah, no, he was really good. He was quite good. And then I think one of his first years. The problem was the Angels weren't a very good team back then. They're not today either. And he was thrown into the starting rotation at a much too early age. I don't think he even went to the minor leagues. And he had success right away, but then he never really developed some of these other pitches. So he had some success early on. And then he got traded to the Yankees, and they traded a good number of young players for him, and then he made history by throwing the no-hitter in Yankee Stadium. And you can go online and see it, and you can see they're so happy for him. And I think they have a right to be. It's a great story, a guy with one arm who goes to the major leagues and throws a no-hitter. And he became one of the better fielding pitchers in the game. Again, so it wasn't just dealing with his difference, but he became better because of his difference. And I love kind of that theme. And by the end, he was booed because he lost his fastball at a young age, and it bothered him. But then eventually he thought about it. He's like, I'm being booed like any other pitcher being booed. And that was sort of his goal, to be treated like anybody else. So we had a number of good years, and he goes out in history, and we remember him fondly as New York Yankee fans for some of those great years. I'll go through a few of the other players and some of the things they dealt with, both emotional and otherwise. So there's somebody who, to me, has the most remarkable story, is R.A. Dickey, a pitcher in the major leagues. He pitches for Toronto right now. Excuse me. So R.A. Dickey grew up single. Actually, his parents divorced at a young age, and he was sexually abused by a female babysitter at a young age, and then just months later by a boy in the neighborhood. So, and he bottled that up. He never told anyone until later. I'll get to that. But he kind of went through a lot of difficulties. He had a fight with his parents and didn't have much money, so he ended up doing things like he needed to live somewhere, so he would break into abandoned homes, or homes where just abandoned, just empty homes, apartments. He was very smart. He went on listings, for real estate listings, and he saw apartments that were being rented, and he saw what would be empty. So he would break in. He didn't break anything literally, but he would somehow get into these apartments, and he would roll up a sweatshirt, put it down on the floor, and go to sleep at night. And he was a really difficult childhood, but he had this remarkable ability to throw the fastball and strike people out. And he got drafted by the Texas Rangers, and he was about to sign $1 million signing bonus, $1 million contract to sign with the Texas Rangers, and he was on the cover of a magazine with a bunch of other young kind of future stars. And a trainer for Texas Rangers noticed the picture and thought something was a little odd, because he was holding his arm. Everybody else was sort of like this, and he was holding his arm like that, kind of like that. And you and I probably wouldn't have noticed anything. I know I wouldn't have noticed anything, but the trainer said, that looks a little odd. Let's bring him in for some extra tests. And it turns out, they tested him, and it turns out he was missing a ligament in his arm. And the doctor kind of said, I don't know how you can even turn a handle of a door, let alone pitch the pitch. And R.A. Dickey said, yeah, whatever, I was born like that, but I'm throwing mid-90s or high 90s, so I'm fine. But they slashed the bonus to $50,000. They weren't even giving him anything, but they felt bad for him, and they said, all right, we'll give you a $50,000 bonus. So he goes, a poor kid who grew up with those kind of difficulties and bottled up issues, about to sign $1 million contract, and they throw it out the window. And so he starts in the minor leagues. He's like, I'm going to show them. And he tries, and he doesn't really succeed. And he's a fastball pitcher, and he's throwing hard, but he's not great. And then over time, he loses his fastball, and it's not clear it's related. He doesn't think it's related to the missing ligament. Maybe it is, but he really is in a difficult situation, and he contemplates suicide at one point. He's in a car, and he's like, I'm just going to end it. He had 2 little kids, and he couldn't really, he was in the minor leagues for years, and he was worried about supporting them. And he obviously didn't kill himself, but what he did do, and there's a real lesson here, and you see it a few times in the book, he found someone to talk to. In his case, it was a therapist. And he opened up about his issues. And obviously, when you look at it from take a step back, and obviously his issues in terms of pitching and his unhappiness was related to what happened to him when he was younger, and he never got to talk to anybody about it, and he felt guilty about it. A little kid, unfortunately, sometimes will feel guilty about those kind of issues unnecessarily, and he did feel guilty, and so luckily he found a therapist, and he didn't want to go to the therapist, and he ends up going like the back door of the therapist. He went to see him, but he eventually got really comfortable talking and opening up, and you see it a lot of times in my book. I'll talk about somebody in a second, but when he started opening up, all of a sudden he started pitching better. Now, he lost his fastball, and he couldn't really pitch, couldn't make the major leagues as a fastball pitcher, but he taught himself the knuckleball, and he's one of the few people to throw it in the major leagues, and he became a Cy Young winner for the Mets, got traded for a lot of talent to Toronto, and he's had a successful career. So I find his resilience and his ability to deal with all this stuff, poverty and abuse, all kinds of things, really impressive. There's another player I'll talk about who dealt with abuse, physical abuse, not sexual abuse. His name is Jacques Demers. And he was in Upper Montreal area, and his father would beat him regularly, and he would get to school every day, and he couldn't concentrate on his studies. He just couldn't pay attention because he's thinking about what's going to happen tonight, and he's thinking about his mother, who was at home with his abusive father, and what was going on there, and he just couldn't concentrate on his studies, and he basically never learned how to read or write, and he was functionally illiterate. Smart guy, but he never learned how to read or write, because and there are more people than you would think that in this country that had issues reading and writing, in the prison system especially. I don't think it's coincidence that a good percentage of the people in the prison system have some issues reading and writing. So he had this secret, and he didn't want to tell anyone. Okay, so he starts coaching. He wasn't a great player, but he starts coaching hockey. And he's really good at coaching hockey. And what he does is sort of the opposite strategy of his father. The father was just a bad guy and not supportive, and what he does, Jacques Demers, is he embraces the opposite strategy, and he's like this rah-rah, supportive, warm, friendly guy, and he becomes sort of the father figure that he never had, but he is to his players, and they love him, they give 100% for him, and he starts off different leagues in Montreal, and he gets to the NHL, and he coaches. He was back-to-back Coach of the Year. He was Stanley Cup champion. At one point, he was GM. But the whole time, he's got a secret. And he doesn't want to tell anyone about the secret because he doesn't even want to tell his kids, his own family, because he's worried that his kids are going to tell a friend, and it's going to get out. And who the heck wants a coach who can't read or write? So he came up with these amazing tricks to trick people into thinking he could read or write. So he would walk around with newspapers a lot under his arm. He started wearing glasses, not because he needed them, because that way if someone ever needed him to sign anything, he could say, I can't find my glasses. He would always order the special that the waiter read to him when they went to a restaurant. There are a lot of fascinating, really ingenious ways, and we write about in the book, that he told us that he used to trick people. But just like with R.A. Dickey, it was sort of bottled up and a secret. You can't hide a secret really your whole life without it coming back to affect you. So he finished his coaching career, and he became a broadcaster. But when he was around 60 of age, he had his anger issues, and his wife couldn't take it anymore. And she's like, "You better go." And she had figured it out actually, but no one else did. "You better go figure it out. You better go deal with your issue." Basically, she said. And he also went and got help and found a therapist and went to his kids. And he was scared about telling his kids. He was embarrassed. And they embraced him, and they said, "We love you all anyway," and became a member of parliament in Canada. And now he kind of talks about illiteracy, and he tries to fight for people and help people, and he goes around the country there. So really a remarkable story in my view, an impressive guy. So a couple other people I'll talk about are people dealt with sort of socioeconomic challenges, poverty, racism. One is Dwayne Wade. So Dwayne Wade has his own amazing story. So when he was 6, he's watching cartoons one day, and the cops burst, and he lived in Chicago, grew up in inner city Chicago, and the cops burst into his home, put a gun to his head, and they said, "Where's your mother?" Because his mother was dealing drugs and was abusing drugs. And the mother was in the bathroom at that point, doing drugs, and he knew enough to try to warn her. So he basically he had to tell where she was. He had to tell them where his mother was, but he did it. He tried to be loud, and there was enough commotion that it would warn, and he tried to kind of warn in his own way, a 6-year-old way. He tried to warn his mother, and they opened the door up, and they couldn't find the drugs. She had flushed it down, but they arrested her anyway for dealing. And later that night or the next morning, she came back home and acting as if nothing had happened, because to her, she had dealt with this kind of stuff, and he had to deal with that stuff. So he grew up, it was very difficult, and he had a father who was a loving father, but they had divorced, and he lived kind of farther away in the suburbs outside of Chicago, and he'd come once a week, and he would go watch his father play basketball, and it was like the best thing ever. And one day, his 9-year-old older sister brought him on a bus, Dwayne, to go to the father and leave him there at the father, and forced the father in some ways to take over from there. And thank God she did, because the father was a disciplinarian and gave him chores and gave him a role model. And you see it also in a lot of these players. So LeBron was also like that. So LeBron grew up with a loving mother, but no father figure to keep an eye on him and to show him the way. And the mother was an interesting woman and a hardworking woman, but she couldn't really keep them in their home. They once lived in a really beautiful home, the grandmother's home, but they lost it. And she worked hard, but she was never really around either. And she partied a little bit too. And LeBron, it's amazing. I mean, if you hear his interviews, he's a mature guy, never had any issues. You never see any scandals with him. And what he dealt with is really impressive. So he basically, what he did, and also Dwayne Wade, I'm telling together, they both found a mentor. And so LeBron had a coach who looked after him and saw talent, and it wasn't because he wanted to make money off him or anything. It was hard to tell. Back then he was so young. He did dominate. He was playing football. First it was football. He was a dominant guy, but it was not clear he was going to do anything with his career. But you got a lot of these people found someone to look after them, be a mentor. So again, Dwayne Wade's father was, and he became that role model, but LeBron found a coach. And you find it often in some of these other players. There's another player we read about, Caron Butler, who was a basketball player, and I'm forgetting exactly, and there's my son's one who discovered him originally. He was arrested, I think it was 11 times before the age of 12. And he really was this close to sort of going the other side of life and not doing anything with himself. And to his credit, it was really Caron who kind of said, he was in a prison. He was in solitary confinement, actually, at a young age. And he looked outside a window and he saw what life could be. There was a basketball court there, and he said, you know what am I doing here? He was getting in fights in prison. That's why they put him in solitary. So he realized to himself that he can't go this way, and he came out and he started working at a fast food place. And friends were teasing him because he had a uniform, and they're like, what the heck are you wearing that thing for? Why are you working at the fast food? And he ignored them. And again, you see it a lot with our players. They have this single-minded focus. And for every Caron Butler, you had 10 guys who got distracted, and who doesn't? I've got kids, and I got to tell them to get off the TV and get off the video sometimes. It's hard as a young person, especially today. The phone and everything. There's so many more reasons for distraction, but it's all the more reason to try to have that focus. That's one of the things that jumped out at us in the book. I'll just talk about just a couple. One last person, I guess, who I was a little bit skeptical. Someone said, you got to talk to Shane Battier. Shane Battier, this time raise your hand if you know who Shane Battier is. Okay, more people than I would have thought. Pretty impressive. So Shane Battier was never a dominant player, but he was always a successful player. In college, won championships. In the NBA, won championships. He was at Duke. And he grew up pretty upper middle class, suburban Michigan, outside of Detroit. And so someone said, oh, you got to talk to Shane Battier. And I'm like, well, I don't know. The guy's been successful everywhere. I think he was high school player of the year. He won Duke maybe 2 championships. In Miami Heat, he won 2 championships. I don't know. What has he dealt with? You know, again, upper middle class. And then I talked to him, and he's a fascinating story. So he grew up his also mixed race family. I forget which, the father or the mother. And he never felt accepted growing up in sort of a white school in suburban Michigan. They weren't racist, and maybe it was part of his own insecurity, but he little things here and there, and you'll see in the book, the times when he felt he didn't fit in, and it bothered him. And then he was a really good basketball player, so he would just basically go practice by himself a lot and deal with it that way. And then he had a chance to go into the inner city Detroit, and he was excited. He's going to go play with some really good talent, and maybe they'll like him and all that. And then the first day he gets there, and they start teasing him. They're like, "Oh, the white kid from the suburbs coming to play ball with us," and the cute little dimples, and they got on him there. So he never felt he fit in anywhere back home, which was majority white, or in the inner city when he's playing basketball at AAU and other kind of leagues where there were more black kids. And again, part of it is probably himself and his own insecurities, and he didn't really feel, again, there wasn't overt racism, but he felt it, and he didn't really fit in either way. And he made a decision one day, and it's pretty impressive for a young person. It took him till maybe high school or so, but he basically made a decision that, you know what, I'm not going to be accepted by either community. So I got to be happy with myself. And he would go play by himself and work on his game and ignore everybody else. But what he also did was develop a unique kind of game that was basically a reflection of who he was, not caring what other people thought. So what he started doing was things like taking a charge. So I guess I should explain taking a charge for people in the room. Basically, you're playing defense and a guy's coming at you, and instead of moving out of the way or maybe swiping at him or something, you stand your ground, and then you get pushed back, and you land on your tuchus, as it were, and it can be embarrassing, but you get the other person, there's a foul on the other player, so it's taking a charge, and you don't always look so good. He was doing other things too. He would put his hands in the opposing player's face when they took a shot. It's not the coolest thing to do. You want to reject the shot, but putting your hand in their face is a little bit old school. But he didn't care. He would do things like that. He would always guard. He would volunteer to guard the best player on the other team. He came off the bench sometimes. He volunteered to come off the bench. He basically said he'd make the extra pass. He basically said, I don't care about looking cool because I'm never going to be cool because I can't fit in anywhere. And he calls himself like a runt. And again, it's that same theme of turning a disadvantage into an advantage. I'm gonna read from what he says here. Hold on one second, because I think it's a cool quote that sums it up. I thought it was nice. So he says, and he looks back on it, and he says, I can fit in anywhere. I'm the all-American mutt. So basically, he kind of did the things that other people wouldn't do. He didn't care what they thought. And he says, here's a quote, "When I was 8, 9, or 10, I wish I could have seen a snapshot of myself at 35 or 36 and how awesome it is to be different. How awesome it is to be different and not like everyone else. That's what makes life fun, being different and creating your own path." So that in some ways sums up Shane Battier, but also in some ways sums up the book and Rising Above. And the players, they all came to embrace their differences. And again, you don't just succeed despite your differences, which is sort of what I came into the book thinking would be the case. They succeeded thanks to their differences, and they embraced their differences. So I thought that was kind of impressive and a key theme of the book. So I'll stop here, and we can take some questions if you want, and talk about anything and everything. Sure.
Did the Canadian hockey coach ever learn to read and write?
Yes, to some extent. He's not a great reader. He wrote a book with someone that's in French, and he said to me his goal was to be able to read it. So he's not at the point where he can read a whole book, but he can read certain things, and he's a very sharp guy. I mean, if you can be a coach of the year, but also trick people for decades. You got to be pretty smart, inherently smart. So he's a very smart guy, but he just never learned how to read or write. So he's getting better. He's getting much better at it, yeah.
Do the kids today, and far away from that time, do they would sit around and talk about the sport heroes, where they are from or how they live? Do the kids really do that?
Many do, and more importantly, the reason we did this as a book for young people is they look up to sports athletes. So it's one thing to write about somebody in this room who, overcame stuff, but when an athlete overcomes things, there's a lesson there that I think young people hopefully will embrace. Sure.
So it seems like a lot of these players, they have some just animal hero to our story where they're overcoming this obstacle and becoming a hero, whether that's in the community or just even for themselves, I think. How do you think, what comes next for them? I mean, how do you manage somebody, you live your whole life and no one really expecting a lot out of you, and then you become successful and your whole kind of environment and the context you're operating in changes. And having not with them and spoken with them, I just be kind of curious to hear if there are any commonalities across that and how you deal with this turn of how they see themselves.
Yeah, what's interesting, listen, it's a self-selecting group, so these are the success stories. And what jumps out at me is how many of them want to keep getting better. So like a Serge Ibaka, he's worth tens of millions right now, signed a huge contract, but he knows lots of expected of him. And I believed it when he said it, that he wants to keep getting better. And he realizes he gets a lot of criticism, especially social media today and such. And so they've got a high bar they have to meet. So the way they explain it to me is, and again, these are the success stories. To be this successful, they're always trying to get better. And they feel that pressure to keep it up and even keep getting better. I mean, guys like LeBron, obviously, but I met Steph Curry, and they all have a chip on their shoulder, too. So Steph Curry, I was in the locker room with him over this last year, and he's a super duper star, obviously, but he remembers, and I write about it in the book, he remembers he wasn't elected to the All-Star game a few years ago, and it drives him, it still bothers him, and he talked about it. So you'd be surprised, they've got, it's like we all have these insecurities, they have them too.
You mentioned single-minded focus on all elite guys. Did you interview them? My perspective in some cases is that the single-minded focus also kind of conflicts with the desire to be selfish in a sense. A lot of the guys, they can't keep families or marriages together. Some of the stories you said, some of the people they do, but I feel like they have a lot of success individually, but it's hard for them to have success around them because of the selfish nature I think it takes to be so single-minded.
Yeah, I didn't see that. I think you can say that about a lot of stars, but the ones that we picked anyway are pretty family-oriented, like an R.A. Dickey or Steph. For whatever reason, they learned from their lessons. They try to be better parents. A lot of these people didn't have it. Steph had a good parent, but R.A. and others, I think they learned from and they try to be better parents. If some, in some ways, they maybe they're too kind to their parents. They went through. I mean, it's learning with from these setbacks and dealing with them that really teaches you lessons, life lessons. And they're wealthy, a lot of these guys now, so they I wouldn't say they smother their kids or something, but I think they go to that extreme because they went through such tough times. So I agree with what you're saying that not every star is like that, but it could be just the ones that we picked. As far as I can tell, seemed to be pretty good, pretty family-oriented. And we tried to pick some of the good guys. I mean, we didn't include everybody. A lot of people have gone through stuff. I don't want to name who they are, but we threw out a lot of people that we could have talked to who maybe aren't the greatest role models. We tried to pick some good role models for kids. I'll take like one more, then I'll be over here. I'm going to sign some books and I can talk to people. Sure.
In today's environment, and because of all the institutions you have in this country, starting from high school, grammar school, colleges, it's become more focused on business aspect. Some of these athletes, I mean, I recall, I don't know how old you are, but I recall the Time magazine once had a 7'2" guy on a cover, and like you said, couldn't even read.
Yeah.
Graduated from Loyola, Chicago. Now, in all the years I've been watching sports, what happens to these kids that don't make it? The percentages are so high. For some, 1%. Look, you have Division 3, 2, 1, all these college kids, and some of them come out I tell kids, you below your knee, there goes your career.
No, I agree with that. I mean, listen, I'm no expert when it comes to this. I do think there are a lot of kids who, you'd be surprised, I think, listen, there are too many people who think they're going to go pro. But there are a lot of people that realize it's a ticket to an education. If you can if it helps you get into a Division III school, Division II, Division I, you'd be surprised how many people are rational about it and realize that, okay, maybe they want to go pro, but they know it's a challenge and maybe an impossibility even, but they're going to use this to get a good education or get a degree. So, and yeah, it is, money is a bigger issue, but in some ways you can look at it as a positive, that it focuses them on what they need to do to get where they need to be. And sometimes it means getting an education using basketball or using football or some other sport to get into a college, or to help you get it. Even if you don't get a scholarship, it gives you an advantage over, my short kids, whatever. So hey, why not? Everyone takes an advantage. Use that advantage in life and meet people. And people, like I deal with Wall Street guys, they really appreciate athletes because it's all about competition and focus and dealing with losses. That's what life's about. So they can sell themselves easier than other people. Everyone wants to talk to an athlete. I don't care who you are, So there are advantages too to that. So okay, should I take one more, then I'll stop?
Do you interview any women athletes?
Very good question. So that's the one criticism people have had of our book. We've got one woman in our book, but the reason we didn't have more, and we should have made this clear in here, we're writing a second book, and it's about female athletes. So I'm going to talk to Carl. I'm sorry? I don't have daughters, no. Maybe that's why we started with the men, no. But, I like women, so. So we're going to have female stars, Serena and Venus, and Ronda Rousey, and I'm going to meet with Carly Lloyd next week, and Kerry Strug for people like gymnastics. So we have some really great stories there, too. That'll be coming out next year. So, yeah, we should have made it clear, because the critics have been sort of, good book, we really enjoy it, but we're the women, and I should have put it in there that we're going to come out with a second book, so look for that next year. So I'll be around here, and if you want to talk or follow me on Twitter and that kind of stuff, I'll stay in touch with you that way.